All right, so why don't we get going? Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our, our last breakout session for the day before some other things planned here with the NETA conference day 2. My name is Tony Tredeller. I'm the Associate Director of Admission at St. Anselm College. I'm also on the NETA governing board as well, and working as the facilitator this afternoon. Now, just want to let folks know, if you do have questions, it looks like we have a fairly small group here, but just going to ask if you have questions that come up during the presentation, please type them into the chat box. We want everybody to, and we'll have the presentation go, and then we'll have time at the end to answer questions that folks have. Also, as a reminder, we are using Crowd Live for this session. So if you log into the CrowdPur app or crowd.live, the code for this session is NETA 3. I think Brian just dropped that into the chat box as well. So so be able to participate in that way as well. So I'd like to take a moment now and introduce our presenters. Stefanie Deprey is the Assistant Director of Transfer at Bristol Community College, and Evan Desatnick is the Associate Director of Transfer at Massasoit Community College, and they're here to enlighten us and give you some Articulation 101. So folks, take it away, and thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Thank you, Tony, for being our facilitator. Great to have you with us. And on behalf of Stephanie and myself, we're thrilled to have you joining us today for this session. We know we're at the last breakout group session options of the conference. So again, thank you for choosing us and being with us today. The title of today is NETA Articulation 101. And it's a really, I think, an important session to have, because what we're able to do is really connect a lot of dots that have been themes throughout the conference. If you were at the keynote yesterday and even today, there were some great themes about partnerships, about collaboration. This is really what we do in the world of higher ed and really in the world of transfer. So we are excited to sort of bring this articulation piece as not only good professional development, but also leave you with some actionable items that you can take and really work on, both within your institution and generally for yourself. So as we look at the presentation outcomes for today, we're going to go over a relatively small PowerPoint, and then we're going to get in, like Tony said, try to take some question and answers, make it a discussion piece at the end, so we can leave some time for that. So today's outcomes are general understanding of articulations. We want to make sure we kind of have a general understanding of what they are. And again, for folks that have been in transfer for a while, we're glad you're here. For folks that are new to NETA, new to transfer, new to higher ed, the foundational points of this presentation really are for you, because I think it's really important to allow for that growth for new people coming in. So let's understand what articulations are. Let's talk about the foundational aspects of creating articulations. I'm going to talk about the overview of maintaining agreements, sort of what that means. And then, as I mentioned, aspects you can bring to your institution. And we actually have a worksheet, presentation worksheet, that will be coming through, that just was sent through the chat. So please make sure you pull that up, and whether you're using that during, after, 3 days later, a year later, make it something that you can take with you to really get the wheels turning on how you can utilize some of these things that we talk about today into your daily work. And finally, I sort of added this late in the creation of the presentation, but evaluating your professional currency, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that you're investing in professional development, which means that you're investing in your career. You're investing in your currency as a professional. Whether you've, again, been with us for years or it's your second day, you want to make sure what can you bring as what is your currency in your own organization. And I think that's something to think about as you go through this today, and frankly through the whole conference and any conference down the road. What are some things that you can bring back to your institution that will really assist in your professional currency? So just trying to theme that together. So let's go to the next slide and take a scan. Stefanie?
All right, so we're going to do a quick scan of the room using our CrowdPer technology. So if you visit crowd.live and enter the code NETA3, you'll be able to participate. And our first question, just to get a sense of who's here, we are curious how long you've been working in higher education.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like we have a combination of folks that have been working in higher education between 1 to 5 years, 16 to 20 years, 11 to 15 years, and then 21 to 25 years. So I think we have a good combination here of folks that are new to the game, you know, somewhat new, whether you're in the 1 year to 5 year pool, but then other folks that come to the group today with a lot of experience, and then some folks in the middle. So wherever you are, we do look forward to hearing about your experiences and input as we work through the presentation today, because it's all so valuable, whether you're at the beginning or whether you're seasoned. And the next question through CrowdPer is, how long have you worked specifically in transfer services?
Quick thank you to Brian, who's our, you know, our leader behind the scenes making this happen. So this is great. Thank you, Brian.
We all have our phones right in our hands,
Yeah,
so why
yeah.
not use them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're seeing,
Nice.
so a strong majority of folks have been in transfer for 1 to 5 years. The next highest category would be the 6 to 10 years, followed by some folks 21 to 25 years, and then 11 to 15 years.
Great. This is great. Okay. So let's do a little bit of the who, what, where, when, and why, and then we'll get into some how to frame this for you. Let's start with what. What is an articulation agreement? Basically, it's formal agreement between institutions with the goal to achieve maximum transferability for courses and or programs, okay? So that's really what you're looking at when we sort of talk about articulations. And there's, you know, there's deviations of those things, but that's really the main piece of what an articulation is. And what are some things you really should consider when you are partnering with an institution for an articulation? Couple helpful thoughts. One, is the agreement student focused? Let's start with that. Now, we can assume, because we all love working with our students and we're all student centered and everything like that, that it is, but it's important to make sure that you double down on that and make sure that you understand that what is student focused in one person's mind of the creation of an agreement may need to be reviewed by various eyes to make it even more student focused. And that means understandable for students, and that means something that they can actually do and something that they can participate in. So is the agreement student focused? That includes general design. So when we talk about general design of the agreement, is it what parts of the agreement are going to be most beneficial for the students, right? Are you talking about programs? Are you talking about certain courses, maybe the general education courses, but there's some other courses in the agreement that need to be hashed out in a different way? What is the general design of the articulation you're working on, okay? What are the overall outcomes? Okay, what is the overall goal here? And really the ROI, what's the return on the investment? Okay, it's one thing to talk about doing an articulation, but you really have to scan what the ROI and the general outcomes should be, because you want to make sure, again, that you're able to, that this is able to have legs, okay, that this is able to have wings and really be something that's fruitful and marketable and something that translates to the student experience. But now, as you heard from the intro, I work at a community college, Stefanie works at a community college. We understand that there are many sides to this discussion, right? So we have the community college perspective, which we're bringing, but also from the four-year perspective as well. And from the baccalaureate institutions, we want to make sure that the return on investment and the other things I mentioned previous are both attainable for both institutions. The other thing is, like I said, to take all perspectives into account, okay? So the faculty perspective, the administration perspective, the enrollment perspective, all of those things really play a role. And that really takes me to the next piece, which is, who is your team? And one of the things I've learned over in my experience, and I've been in transfer services. I try, my vote I think was between 6 to 10 years. I can't remember now, but it's around that time. I have learned that building a team around me, and these are some things that have been talked about prior, have been really critical for me. It is not something that as associate director I can do alone, and not something that I would necessarily try to do alone, and that I need to bring partners from my institution in so people feel that we are collaborating for those outcomes that I mentioned previous. Okay, so that's a little bit of the what. Now the big question again, why? Why are we doing this, right? What is the rationale behind the agreement? So we know what it is, but why? What are we doing? Who is having the discussion, right? And I'll go into that. That's actually the who slide, but I'll talk about it right now. In general, in terms of what is the rationale, do 2 faculty members just think it's a great idea? That could be fine, but again, where's the rationale beyond just that, right? What is the research and development on this? What is the R&D, okay? Has there been any study about the programs? Have you looked at institutional research? Have you looked at past enrollment? Have you noticed, well, criminal justice does very well with this college, so we want to continue with maybe if we have a new securities program or other things that fall under the criminal justice wing, we can continue in that format. Or we noticed that really a lot of students aren't going in this program. Do we need to look back and look at some of our research and development as we ask ourselves the questions of why, okay? Programmatic, new program, is it a new program? Is it an old articulation? Why are we doing this? Is it something that we're maybe articulation that had been out there prior to you being in the position, and someone says, oh yeah, we have an articulation with them, and you look at them and say, I don't know what that is, I can't find that. I'm speaking a little bit from my experience, where in my institution, there were articulations kind of floating around, things have been worked on. So you have to really ask yourself why and where am I finding these things? You have to look at transfer trends, and that really gets into the research and development piece as to what the transfer trends are. You hear a lot about STEM, you hear a lot about career-based, right? So what are some things that are out there in your region, in your area, in your institution, and with your partners that might be trending in the world of transfer that might be helpful for you? The other big why is like, are there financial incentives, right? What are the financial incentives? Now that's, when we think about financial incentives, let's really try to think about this as a business to business negotiation, if you will. Sort of what are some of the things that you think would be beneficial for your students financially that the four-year college can offer that would allow more students to potentially want to participate? Merit scholarships, other incentives financially that you can bring, that the 4 years can bring into light for our students. That can be part of the agreement, which again goes back to how do we market the agreement? And when we have those things behind it, that can be very helpful. And then also let's take into consideration geographical considerations, okay? For the last year, geography has become, we have a new definition of geography because geography now does not, frankly, technically matter if you're thinking about working on agreements that have an online component. So you have to look at why are we doing this and for what reasons, and those would be some considerations to think about.
All right, so in thinking about why to create an articulation agreement, we are going to go back to our crowd per technology and answer a couple of more questions. So curious, for those of you in the room, do you work for a 2-year or a 4-year institution?
Good mix. Oh.
So it looks like we have slightly more folks receiving the students coming from the articulation agreements. We have maybe 9 folks from the 4-year and 6 from the 2-year. Okay, and then our next question on Crowd Live is, do you work for a public or a private institution? And it looks like we have the majority of folks here work at a public institution. 10 of us here work at a public institution and 4 work at a private.
Great, good. Okay, thanks. Let's continue on with some of the themes here. So for who, the other big question that comes to mind is, who did the agreement, where did the, where is the agreement from? Who is it from, right? Who's been working on the agreement? And in my experience, and I'm sure others that are out there, it can vary. It can be all over the place. And again, speaking for myself, I've seen them all over the place. Some that I knew about, some that were halfway signed before I knew about them, and some that I never heard about. So it does sort of run the table of many different places. Faculty, staff, presidents, provosts, deans may have conversations and start initiating an articulation that you might have said, I didn't even, how did I know that even existed, right? You might come from College Foundation, alumni relations, other places that, again, would not be necessarily the first place you would think these agreements may start, but they could, as well as from transfer folks, right? So again, I framed this slide to try to say that when you are building your team, it's important that you think about where the agreement and who the agreement came from. So you're able to bring partners to the table and form some sort of a coalition at your campus, both to and for your colleges, to make sure that all touch points are being made so the agreement can be best utilized upon signing, right? So it's not just something that was sort of pushed through without other eyes on it. So you have to consider the who in terms of this process. And the where and when, right? So when we talk about the where, are you transferring to a baccalaureate institution from sort of the classic way? So students at my institution, Massasoit, would say, okay, I'm a graduate. I'm looking forward to going to the 4-year college. I plan on, living in the dorms and blah, blah, blah. The classic transfer student, the classic transfer articulation agreement. However, as the world has changed, as things have changed, as we've gotten more clever with how we approach transfer, there are so many different options than the classic transfer articulation of that sort of 2 to 4 in the classic sense. So one of the things I wanted to mention was that whole idea of the transfer agreement being signed where students who are at the community college remain at their institution, and the 4-year institution teaches the baccalaureate on the community college campus. I'm sure many of you have that model out there. If you don't, this is something that does happen, that is out there. Former Massasoit president was very big on this model, and for the last about 2 years, worked on a lot of this process. We do have a successful model called University Collaborative Model with Curry College. So if Curry's out there, shout out to Curry. But we have a great model with them, with our nursing program. We're looking at other programs where folks who are nursing graduates of Massasoit stay on campus and then get the baccalaureate instruction without having to leave the comforts, if you will, of Massasoit. So there are many different wheres when we talk about the where. And finally, the when, the time of agreement. And one of the reasons I mentioned the time, when are you signing this agreement, and when are you working on the course articulation, because that could affect alignment with your college catalog, right? And the program requirements. So it's really important to consider, if you're working on a framework for articulation, if your college catalog is going to change, that's going to change or could potentially throw a little bit of a challenge into your course articulation that you've created, because it might be, again, you're going from one year to the other. So that could be something you want to make sure you pay attention to. And then finally, the evaluation of the agreement yearly or bi-yearly or more than that, in terms of looking at how you assess what you have done, right? And what are some of the challenges, what are some of the strengths, and what are some of the things that you would want to maybe look at to either add, subtract, or make edits to for the agreement. So those are really the who, what, where, when, and why I think I've covered.
All right, so we are curious who has been there, who has done that. So our next question through CrowdLive, have you ever been involved in the creation of an articulation agreement? Just a yes or a no? Okay, so it looks like we've had 10 people that have voted yes and 7 that have voted no. So if we want to take, let's say 3 to 4 minutes, we're going to go to the next question and just say if you answered yes, what has been a challenge or a strength in your process? So, thinking about what types of things have supported you in going through the articulation agreement process, and what things would you consider obstacles? We'll take a few minutes to discuss that.
Stephanie, how are you looking for people to chime in on that question? Is it in
Sure. So
because I know not everybody has we have a few people who are don't have crowd.live, so they may drop in. If you have feedback and you're not using CrowdPer, feel free to drop that into the chat box that we can look at as well, folks.
Yes. Yep. So if you just want to write a quick note, considering what the subject is and whether it was a benefit or a hindrance to your experience. All right, so let's scroll through and sort of see what's coming through on CrowdLive. We have one challenge, having faculty review new courses in a timely manner. So, we recognize the full plate that our faculty members have, and maybe not having the time to be able to dedicate to reviewing new courses to align with our timelines, of course. Struggle with clear communication of agreement with students and how to implement that agreement across the board. So this is another thing to think about, sort of, the buy-in and how to share it across the campus community, definitely. Coordination of all the constituents in a timely manner. I think that's something we can all relate to. Evan sort of lended to this before, no institutional memory of past agreements. So of course, we land and transfer, and what has been done before we were here, what has been done maybe on the academic side that a student services side of things doesn't know. Signatures. So one other challenge is signatures and strength of the credit alignment, courses not being equivalent. One strength was having leadership behind advancing, which I think we can all agree really lends to the positivity factor and the motivation factor behind establishing an agreement and then being able to market the agreement to the campus, of course. Curriculum committee's time are definitely challenges, for those of us that sit on curriculum, that reviewing the courses and program changes can be a time-consuming process rather. And then of course, implementing the changes into the next year's catalog and how that affects articulation agreements. It's like that wheel that just never stops turning, right? And then benefits, getting upper management, deans on board. Again, always a good feeling when you have the support of your academic folks behind an agreement. Is there anything in the chat that I don't see?
Let's see.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much for For the input, it's always a great thing to come together and say, oh, you have that problem, I do too, and you have that strength, and we can collaborate on that. So thank you for participating in that that question. All right, so the next part of our presentation, we're just going to get into the actual process. So for those of you that have done articulation agreements before, it's my sense that your process may look different or similar, obviously, to what I'm going to explain. And for those of you that are new, this hopefully will shed some light on, where to even get started with articulation agreements. So if you want to start wrapping your head around this image, this is what you're looking at. So this is an image and explanation of the life cycle, basically, of an articulation agreement. Starting in the middle, the obvious focus here is creating an articulation agreement. You want to start with the origination. Our hope in transfer services is that faculty and program coordinators will toss their idea our way, so the proper channels can be followed. And then transfer services would have the opportunity to research existing or former agreements and partnerships that are already in place that relate to the suggested agreement. So let's just say a faculty member comes to you with an idea for an agreement in a new subject, but you already have an agreement with that school in another subject. The foundation is already there, and so it might just mean building out your course equivalencies a little more, or it might mean you're going to the drawing board and starting from scratch, which can also be a beneficial process as well. If you're inventing the wheel from the very start, it kind of gives you that clean slate to get things right from the beginning. So the next step would be curriculum review for the 2-year and the 4-year schools to see what courses line up. So, lining up the curriculum, how does it look? English, math, general education, major courses. So in this phase, transfer services will likely work with faculty members and program coordinators to review the course descriptions. Sometimes they'll call on course syllabi to get more details. Sometimes they'll have to look at accreditation. So let's say you're working with paralegal, they'll look at the ABA accreditation. And then the two schools can determine exactly what can be transferred in as direct equivalencies. The final review stage involves transfer services, faculty members, program coordinators, deans, anyone else involved. And this is hopefully when the terms can be set into place as well to determine, okay, what are the benefits of this agreement? So is it course to course? Is it a blanket agreement where the 4-year agrees to take the entire associate's degree? And then what does it look like for the student? So is the 4-year school in a position where they can guarantee the acceptance, they can waive an application fee, offer maybe a tuition discount or any other incentives, right? And then finally, academic affairs, the presidents will review and sign the agreement. What I've noticed is signing the agreement is done a bit differently at each institution. Different levels of folks will want their name on the signing page. So you kind of have to take it agreement by agreement to see really who should be represented and be mindful of that. And then next is the publication phase. So thinking about where the participating schools will post the new agreement to the website, share it out with students, staff, faculty, and the campus community. Sometimes, a special event will highlight the new agreement, or administration might want a public signing to showcase the document and those involved. And sometimes marketing will get involved in the agreement, which can help as a retention or a recruitment tool for the college, and it can also certainly help transfers cause in getting the word out there. So then in thinking about the life cycle of the articulation agreement and what it looks like, I'm going to show you one more document that sort of walks through step by step. So this process really streamlines the formation and the maintenance of an articulation agreement. And for those of us that like to have something in writing to fall back on, this is a helpful tool, to kind of have in your back pocket. This specific document originated with our friends at Quinsigamond Community College. So we'd like to give them credit and show appreciation for their creation of this document and sharing it with us. So again, the initial process begins with information gathering. So who came up with this idea? Perhaps it was a faculty member, perhaps it was someone in transfer services, maybe a colleague in advising, or this has happened before, maybe someone was rubbing elbows with a donor at an event pre-COVID, of course, and suggested the partnership. I have this friend at this college, could we look into a partnership? But either way, it helps to know where the idea originated. Then the person that receives the request is identified, the type of request is identified, and then you go into the next step. So what does it look like? Will it be a course-to-course agreement? Are we just looking at a new course equivalency? Will this be a 2+2? That is identified here. And then this next step sort of points out, what's in it for the student if they follow the agreement. So what does the student get? Again, are we going back to the guarantee of admission, the acceptance of all of the coursework, a tuition incentive, or anything else? And then it's always important to identify, the primary, secondary liaison, any contact person in case, this type of document needs to be reviewed in the future. Sometimes people like to know where things came from and why. This is, sort of a safety net to that. And then we also will use a review process. So thinking about, you created this new transfer agreement, it's in place, let's say for 2 to 3 years or until something changes within curriculum. It's important to, keep tabs on what needs to be reviewed and when. So identifying the expiration of the agreement, contacting anyone that's involved to update and renew it, including your external partners, and then following appropriate sequencing depending on the next steps determined. So, I think what a lot of this comes down to is we're able to come up with great ideas for our transfer agreements and what would work for our students and what would support them through this process. And then the next point is, okay, how do we formalize that? And how do we get something on paper to show students, starting at the community college, you're going to have these benefits, you're going to, finish your degree in X amount of time, X amount of courses, then what does it look like? So does a student want to follow a mass transfer pathway? Maybe. Do they want to follow a more specialized articulation agreement with a private school? Maybe. So then, it also comes down to how do we showcase these articulation agreements and where do we publish them? So, I'm sure in talking with a group of transfer professionals, we could all likely commiserate on the fact that we put a lot of work into these types of documents, and then how do students know about them, right? So you equip your faculty members, you equip your advisors, you cover it all over the website, anywhere you possibly can. But, having these types of documents that we talked about in our presentation today, sort of goes back to having, the support and documentation and, the step-by-step of the who, what, when, where, and why. Evan, before we turn it over to questions, do you have anything you'd like to add to the process slides?
Sure. Just one more quick thing about the sort of when you get to that marketing and communication piece, which you just mentioned. it's one thing to just put a PDF on your website of the agreement, but is an articulation agreement something necessarily every student is going to read if it's 5, 6 pages, or frankly one?
Mhm.
In what language does that really speak to the student? And sometimes these things can be more legal than they really are user-friendly, student-friendly. Um, in I think one thing that is important to consider is to try to find a happy medium with your partner to figure out what you can do for a landing page or some sort of friendly marketing piece that either can be produced by the four-year partner, because that way, if you link that on your website, when the student clicks, I want that agreement, it's going to right to your college's landing page. So then it's, probably calculated there as a lead, or whatever way you can utilize that from a marketing standpoint, I think is a really important piece. I think we had a question in the chat. Let me just, sorry, go
You
ahead.
do have a question that just came in the chat. So if you're looking, if you're not, I can read it for you if you just want to field it. So question was, do you bring in legal counsel for review before the signature phase? And what about catalog updates at both institutions?
So for Bristol, we have, I work closely with someone within our risk and compliance department. And her role in the articulation agreement process is, once the agreement is established and it's ready for signatures, I send her the documents with the signatures to collect, and then she formalizes it through DocuSign. So while she might not be considered legal counsel, she sort of covers the policy process in collecting the signatures and making sure that the agreement follows a protocol that matches the college's goals.
Yeah, similar in that regard, but we don't have that actual specific person, but the provost or the AVP would be in charge of that piece. So if there was something that was a little different in the agreement, where we needed to go to legal, we would do so. But that doesn't happen all the time. And usually the framework of an articulation wouldn't require that, but if it did, we would make sure that we did have someone in legal through the state to take a look at it. Good question, thank you.
Stephanie, there was a note that came in from somebody asking, would you share that previous document that you shared, the transfer agreement process form? I think a lot of people had an interest in, might have had an interest in looking at that or potentially using something
Sure.
similar. So if there's a way that you could share that,
Yep,
that would be great.
So I think we could still field questions, keep it open, Tony, whatever. We have a little time left, right?
Yep, we do. So actually, I have a question for the two of you. With the articulation agreements at your institutions, where do you see them being generated from? Are you being approached more by four-year schools? Are you doing the outreach? Is there a, do you seem to see a majority of them coming from a certain pipeline?
I'll quick answer that, and let Stephanie obviously answer. When I started about, again, 7 years ago, something like that, I did more of the outreach out, where I found myself really reaching out to partners. Now I think it's become a little the other way, if not 50-50. So I'm seeing a lot of 4 years reach out to us. I'm seeing it a lot come from faculty as well, from the 4 years with the faculty that they want to pair with at the 2 year. So I'm seeing it kind of be a little bit more of that 50-50, if not 60-40 split on my end.
I would echo a lot of what Evan just mentioned. I think sometimes we'll get some requests from four-year schools that we're able to look at and review. Another point that we're at Bristol is looking at what we're referring to as the gaps in transfer. So let's say we don't have any articulation agreements for early childhood education. So really sitting down and thinking about, geographically, where does it make sense for our students to transfer? Financially, where does it make sense for our students to transfer? And then reaching out to our four-year partners to establish agreements to fill in those transfer gaps. But like Evan mentioned, I also get a lot of requests from faculty members, which is always nice because they're the ones having conversations with our students, and our students are asking, what if I want to transfer to BU? What if I want to transfer to Arizona State? What does that look like? And then of course, advisors always come up with ideas, and then, the higher administration will as well. Earlier this semester, for example, our president had a meeting with a new administrator at a local private institution, and she came back after their conversation and said, I just met with so-and-so. How great would it be if we could create transfer pathways for X, Y, and Z? And so we hit the ground running with that.
I would just say real quick, and I don't know if there's another question, but I just to say real quick that folks out there, keep in mind that if we look at this process in a wheel, you as the transfer person hold a very big stake in this. And I'm saying this as a supporter and as a cheerleader, because you have a perspective that's really important in this process. And your perspective really kind of goes beyond the lines of the faculty piece and of the administrative piece. And you really have to be vocal about what you think is best for the agreement as the process is happening. So one thing I've learned is to be more vocal about what pieces we think are going to work, what pieces we don't think are going to work. Maybe there's a certain part of the process when we're looking at maybe the research and development piece or the trends, and we go, well, this really we haven't done a lot here with this. So even if you're not necessarily the final say in the agreement, I urge you to be a leader in thinking about providing perspective from the transfer angle, because what happens is, again, back to professional currency, you end up becoming a key perspective for folks that may rely on you for that perspective, okay? Because I think that's an important piece when you consider how to approach these types of agreements. So we left you with one more slide, which is a thank you slide, and it's a Let's Connect slide, which is our contact information. So we hope that we can continue the discussion moving forward, and that you guys will continue to engage with us, and we hopefully left you with some tangible things to take back to your institution, or things to think about that you can actually put into actionable items moving forward. And again, thank you, Tony, for facilitating us.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Stefanie did just drop her email in the chat, but obviously both her and Evan's contact information is on their slide. So if you did want a copy of that document, please email Stefanie. It sounds like she's happy to share that for the price of $19.95 going to the transfer scholarship. No, just kidding. Also want to remind folks, this is our last breakout session for here at Day 2 in NETA. But we would, again, love your feedback on how you feel today went overall. So please, we are doing surveys. You can do that on CrowdPer, CrowdLive. The Day 2 survey, the code is NETA8. So if you would please do that, we really would really appreciate your feedback for your Day 2 experience. And just a plug that starting at 3:15, we will be having our NETA scholarship and award presentation, which is happening. I happen to be the chair of the awards, the award committee. And so there's a plug there to come and, say congratulations to some very deserving individuals and some very deserving students who are receiving NETA scholarships this year. So hope to see you. Check us out there at 3:15. And also a reminder that we have social time this evening too with our with trivia as well. So come on back with a relaxing beverage after you've had a little downtime, dinner or whatnot. We hope we see you for trivia as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stefanie, as soon as you end the meeting, it will just boot
You're like,
everybody
let
out.
us